Well, hello and welcome to today's HIPAA Chat, Surviving a HIPAA Audit. I'm Carol Fly with High Tech Answers, and we are back to HIPAA Chat after taking the month of December off, and we're glad we're back. It's one of our favorite programs that we do throughout the year. HIPAA Chat is sponsored by eFax Corporate, a brand of J2 Global. Please visit them online at enterprise.efax.com to learn more about their solutions and what they can do for you. We appreciate their support of our program, and without them, we couldn't be here. So thank you, eFax. Our host, of course, for HIPAA Chat is Steve Spearman. Steve is the founder and chief security consultant for Health Security Solutions. He has been in the healthcare space for several decades, despite his youthful appearance and George Clooney doppelganger appearance.
It's like all photo editing, right? That's it's not just red eye, it's wrinkles, it's the crow's feet, yeah, the whole nine yards. But thank you, Carol. We'll keep the delusion going.
We're keeping the dream alive.
That's right, absolutely.
The dream alive that I think you agreed I look more like Sandra Bullock than I do Jennifer Lawrence, but I'm good with that too. Steve also has done some work for several of the regional extension centers. You can contact him at spearman@healthsecuritysolutions.com. Joining us today for a triad here is Mike Pearson. Mike is also with Health Security Solutions. Because he submitted a really crummy photo, we deemed him un-Hollywood worthy of an avatar.
I don't know. I think he looks kind of like Satan.
Or at least Anton LaVey.
Okay. Anton LaVey.
Little Ethan Hawke there going too.
Ethan Hawke. That's a good one, actually.
Yeah.
Ethan Hawke. Yeah.
For those of you new to our audience, we do have this running LA joke, so sorry about that. Mike is a 20-year veteran in this space, focusing on IT security and cybersecurity, and he is going to be joining us today to talk about this issue of surviving a HIPAA audit. As usual, before we get into the Q&A portion and take your questions that you asked during the registration, Steve has a couple of slides to go over. So, Steve, it's new to you.
Yeah. So, and I was telling Carol earlier, it's like we could have easily done like 10 slides here. I mean, I'm capable of always doing 100 because I overslide everything. But we're going to keep it down to our usual few. And so by keeping it down, I'm going to completely confess that I'm cheating. And the reason I'm cheating is that we're going to talk about auditing today, and there's no better way to do well in an audit than by complying. The way, if you want to impress your auditor, you're going to understand compliance, you're going to do the things that are required to comply and document that. And basically that's really where we're going with this. And at the end today, I am going to be, there will be a pointer, a slide that's going to point you to a webinar that I give about once a month. Our next one is actually next Friday, and we actually have a whole hour that we devote to understanding compliance and what it's all about. But these are three very key slides from that. And basically, the way I like to talk about compliance, I like to think about levels of compliance, but they're really not 4 levels of compliance. It's everything exists on a continuum. So imagine, that you're now sitting in front of that auditor that we're worried about, and he looks at you and says, yeah, can you, why don't you show me your, your termination procedure? And you look at him and say, termination, what? It's like, and all I can say is we know that this is going to be a really long day because you don't have the things that you need, you don't understand what's required, and you're non-compliant, according to the slide. So now the second thing, maybe you're not that bad, maybe you're compliant on paper, and what this means is the auditor comes and he says, hey, let me see your termination, policy, and you go off. You go off to the side. There's a 3-ring binder on a bookcase, in your office. You plop it in front of the auditor. You blow the dust off and plop it in front of the auditor, and he says, wow. Okay, so have you had any terminations, in the last so long? And you say, oh yeah, we've had, three in the last 6 months or whatever. And the problem with just this compliant on paper is that is this next question. It's like, okay, well, let's look at that. Let's look at your documentation, related to that. And maybe during the conversation, you can even describe to him the practice that you in fact followed to terminate the employee. You said, yeah, well, we got their keys back or whatever. We disabled their account within, or archived their account within the electronic health record, yada yada yada. So you're compliant in practice. But the problem is the last question he's going to ask. He says, okay, let's look at those documents. Let's see the things that you did to prove that you were compliant. So go to the next slide. This is basically where I kind of get at this, is that this is what compliance is. Compliance is having written policies and procedures that are mapped to the regulations. So you need some sort of policy procedure that addresses a specific each of the specific regulations, and there are different ways to do that. Some people have a policy that is a one-to-one relationship to regulations, and some, in the way I think is the better way to do it, is to have policies that are mapped to multiple regulations. However you do it, but they are mapped to the regulations. They should reflect the findings of your risk analysis, and we are, as always, going to be talking about risk analysis today, that are followed, so you actually do what's in them, and that can be proven via a paper trail of forms, reports, logs, audits, different elements that you can demonstrate to an auditor. So, and that basically is what real compliance looks like. And so, that little spiel that I just gave really derives directly from these elements in this slide, which come directly from the regulations. The regulations require you to implement reasonable and appropriate policies and procedures to comply with the standards. Maintain those policies in a written form. Maintain a written record of the action, activity, assessments, logs, audits, forms, checklists, etc. Associated with proving your compliance, and that documentation has to be kept for 6 years. It must be made available for those for which the documents pertain, and you have to periodically review the documentation. So that's within the rules themselves. This is what compliance really looks like. And with that, I think let's go into to some specifics.
Yeah, and just to remind our audience, the questions that we're looking at today are the ones that were submitted during the registration process. Several of you said yes, that I could unmute you to be live, and I'm going to be looking for you to find out what that is. If we don't get to your question, or you have a question as you're listening today, you didn't ask a question, but go ahead and put it in the question box on the dashboard on the right. The system will capture the question, and I'm sure Steve and Mike will do their best to address your question offline. So with no further ado, January 2015, OCR audits are heating up. Everybody's heard that. And Holly from Farmington Hills, Michigan, and Bill from Brockton, Massachusetts, both asked a similar question, which is basically, will the OCR just show up at your doorstep or request an in-person audit, or will the audit generally be done as a virtual or desk audit?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I'll say that let me go and give a little bit of history. So HITECH, which was the legislation that funded meaningful use, had also legislation about HIPAA audits. This thing that we're calling HIPAA audit was written in 2009 and became law in 2009. The first phase of those audits, that audit protocol, was developed by KPMG, and they were the first phase, which involved about 150 targets, happened in 2012, and during the entire year. And so when people ask, well, what's going to happen, the problem is that there's a distinct phase 2 that's going to begin any day now, related to these Office of Civil Rights audits, and that we don't know the precise procedure like we did with stage 1, which they published in the middle of 2012. So in a lot of ways we're going to have to guess, but what we do know is that the discussions as they stand today is that they're going to do a combination of desk audits and in-person audits. And in fact, that's almost a certainty. The only thing that's not a certainty is the percentages, because there was discussion probably back in September that they would mostly do desk audits, and then but a percentage would receive on-site audits, but then on-site audits, and then but then they seemed to change and they said, okay, we're going to focus on on-site. So we don't really know. Now, one thing that we do know that that CMS has come out and kind of pretty much said is that we are going to focus, when we do our audits, we're going to focus on the problem areas that were identified from stage 1. So, for example, they have made it unambiguously clear. I know y'all think I obsess over risk analysis, but risk analysis was a huge finding in stage 1 of the audit, and about 60% of those that audited did not have a risk analysis at all, or did not have one that could reasonably considered compliant with what was expected. So for that, so we do know that. We know that there were certain items within privacy, the privacy rules that weren't, where there were problem areas. And actually, let me back up. The audit will address 3 areas: privacy, security, and breach notification, and kind of how you're doing. So, so the answer is to that is desk or on-site. It's yes, they're going to do both. And we're going to just have to see how it really evolves this year as they start rolling these out.
Right. What are this is Christy from Corinth, Missouri. What are the main points of focus of the auditors, and what are you seeing as the most challenging issues to overcome in an audit? We get that question a lot.
Yeah, this is a good question. Well, let me just say this. Okay, the biggest problem for the target of audits is that people aren't compliant. It's like they don't have what they need to do. And in fact, in a slide presentation that CMS did is actually the end of 2013 about the 2012, they said don't make stupid mistakes. And in this case, the target had gone and found some policies on the web, and they had printed them out with the date that they printed them out at the bottom and presented them to the auditor, and the date was after was after the date that they received the notification letter. And so, needless to say, the auditor was unimpressed. We know from so what would happen before is that you get a notification letter. There is a 20 to 60 day period where you'd receive and review documentation and planning. Then there would be on-site field work. This is, of course, all the stage 1 were on-site audits. Were 3 to 5 business days. They would produce a draft audit report in 10 to 20 days. And then in 10 business days, covered entities provide a response, and then within 30 to 90 days there would be a final audit report. The main thing too, I do want to get to like the on-site. I meant to mention about the on-site is if you're reported or you have a breach, the chances of you having an on-site audit are about 100%. And one of the things, Mike, I'm sure would agree, it's like one of the things that we do in our practice is we really don't want you to get reported. We don't want you to have a breach. And I'm actually conducting a risk analysis right now for a client that we're doing it for as a part of a corrective action plan, and they were reported by a disgruntled ex-employee, and they had to go through all this rigmarole under that. So you need to prepare. But to get back, the biggest areas of challenge are, if you want to drill down to the areas where there's been a lot of weakness, is risk analysis. By far the biggest issues is not having an adequate risk analysis. And in the
Steve,
web,
Steve, if I could just chime in on there real quick and also kind of ask you a question around this, because I'm sure this is going to come up down the road. Clearly, we're talking a lot about meaningful use, and during meaningful use, it says prior to or during your attestation period, you need to perform a risk analysis, right?
Yes.
But we know that it was, I think the actual number was 64% of the auditors found that the targets were non-compliant because they hadn't done a risk analysis.
Right.
So let's say in this scenario that you were kind of walking through there, you get your notification letter that you're going to have an audit, and you certainly don't want to do something dumb like go and printing off policies and procedures that you found on the internet with the dates that are, clearly show that you just did that. But is it good practice, say you haven't done your risk analysis and you go, oops, I might get caught here, I realize I'm out of my attestation period to be able to do a risk analysis. Is there any value in doing a risk analysis prior to OCR auditors coming on site?
So you're okay. So this is a question that kind of gets at two issues: the meaningful use audit and an OCR audit. So meaningful use is looking at meaningful use is actually looking at whether you complied with meaningful use, which requires you to do a HIPAA audit, and so that's how they're related. Let me, as a practical matter, and I do get asked quite often, like, hey, we're being audited for meaningful use, from our, third quarter of last year attestation, can you help us? And my answer to kind of get to your is pretty much kind of no. Even though, given that the actual bar that I believe the desk audits for meaningful use that are being done, given that I think the bar is pretty low, I don't think that they're, rigorously, holding them to like a, this in-depth audit. That I have helped some clients kind of pull together some historical documentation that might help them during that period. But it's generally it's going to be tough. There is going to be one other kind of interesting caveat though, and that is that there was an FAQ, and Carol, I think you may have heard about this too from Jim Tate.
We did.
That CMS actually posted a revised Q&A, and the first version of that was completely wrong. They basically said, oh, as long as you do your risk analysis sometime during the year in which you attest. So let's say you had a Q2 attestation and you did your risk analysis in August. Well, according to that FAQ, you'd be fine. Well, they quickly changed it. They
retracted pretty fast.
They retracted, yeah. It's like not correct. But the one thing that they did kind of change was they had language that suggested as long as you do your risk analysis prior to when you attest. So let's say you did a Q2, period, and let's say you go online to attest to say, yeah, I met the requirements, on August, 30th. If you were to do, according to that FAQ, if you did your risk analysis August 15th, you'd still be good. I want to say something, as what Mike said. What Mike said is kind of the clear reading of the rules. If you go look at the rulemaking and look at that, and I do not want people to do that. I want them to do it prior to or during their attestation period. But there's maybe a little bit of some wiggle room based on that, new FAQ. the relationship between the HIPAA and that, Mike, is like you need to do it consistent with your policies. When it comes to an OCR audit, you need you need to do your risk analysis consistent with whatever your policies are. So I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. I wasn't calling my name.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Adam from Altadena, California wants to know, does the auditor check to see if you have independent audits from a third-party vendor?
So first of all, an independent audit from independent audit. Okay, is this related to? Can you tell from the language? Does it related to business associates, or is it saying, hey, do we have to have a third party to conduct like our risk analysis, for example?
I think what they're wondering, sort of like, I guess the way I read this is sort of like if I file my taxes personally, but if I file my taxes through an actual audit company, is the IRS going to say, oh gosh, well this has been right. That's how I read
just like
that.
with the IRS, the answer is that no, they're not. They're not, because there's no rule that requires you to have a third party do it.
Adam, if I didn't read that right, please chat me privately. But
just let us know. But there's no requirement to do it. I mean, they're going to look at like, hey, did you do what you needed to do if you did it yourself? So, I mean, there's obviously this ongoing question about what do you need? What should you consider outsourcing some of this? And that's a good question to consider.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and the way I kind of read it there, guys, was it sounds like and hopefully the person who wrote that will chime in. It sounds like do they need to have audits performed against their third-party vendors? And that's kind of how I read it, which would be, in most cases, a business associate.
Yeah.
So,
no,
and I actually get this question a lot from other customers who are healthcare covered entities who we're business associates of, where they say, we would like to see, we think we need to see your policies and procedures. And I say, well, our practice is, our policy is we don't share our policies and procedures, but I'll be happy to provide you with a table of contents to prove that, we have all of those policies and we are following them.
Yeah, I get the question asked, like some of the business associates I work with, they say, well, my covered entity has requested a copy of my risk analysis, and Mike actually kind of taught me, it's like, risk analysis is not something you want to just share. I mean, let's imagine you're a business associate and you've got 100 covered entity clients. It's like you don't want to. I'm not saying never to do it. I'm not saying there's anything in the rules that prevent you to do it. But if you think about what a risk analysis is, it could be used as a map to exploit you.
Absolutely.
And given that,
that's interesting.
Yeah, it could be used. So given that, it's something you don't want to give out.
It should be treated as sensitive and confidential information. And I think that should be addressed in your contract language in your business associate agreement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That sort of segues into one of our questions. Tammy from Dayton, Ohio wants to know, are business associate agreements signed every year for existing vendors, or are they good until the relationship is resolved? You get that question a lot too.
B.
Yeah. B.
B. It is, you do not have, so you don't have to sign it every year. The contract terms actually in most business associates agreement actually have termination clauses related to, this is good until we cancel it. And then there's tends to be other language in there around what are appropriate causes for termination and things like that. But now the one thing I'll tell you is that if there are people listening today that have not updated their business associates since Omnibus, which became law in September 2013, well, it became law in March 2013, and you had 6 months to comply, which fell onto, I think it's September 23rd, 2013. There was there was even clarification about around business associates, but the long and the short of it is, if you haven't updated them, since then, you really need to update them.
Yeah. And just curious, relationship resolved or changes, that could be what, for example, your contact person leaves, or
Well, no, generally, I mean, so a business associate's agreement, one of the, first of all, most people actually sign them and it's just complete boilerplate language.
Mm.
But I don't like that in this sense. I think that a business associate's agreement should have at least one section that's not boilerplate or references something that's not boilerplate, and that is, hey, we're a vendor, we're a business associate, and we're going to be, doing stuff that makes us a business associate. I want to know, I'd like to see that defined in the business associate's agreement. So if you are a, let's say, a revenue cycle management consulting company who's trying to help, I would like, that business associate and say, this is kind of what, this company's doing, or in some ways even better is you could reference the agreement. You could, like, if you have a a service agreement with that revenue cycle management company, you said per the
Right.
terms of thing. So I like to see that. It's actually unusual to see it, but I like to see that kind of language.
Just a little tighter, right?
Yeah. But ultimately, a lot of times those contracts expire. They we're going to do this for a year and yada yada yada, and those are when that kind of activity comes into play, so to speak.
One more question, sort of in the BA realm, and then we'll move on. Which this is from Jackie from Altoona, Pennsylvania. What questions and documents should we request from our BAs to ensure that they are meeting HIPAA requirements?
This is a really question. This is a question that requires some nuance, more than probably most people have the patience for, because there's actually, yeah, I know, it's
not
like,
giving us enough credit.
Hey, remember who we're talking about here. I mean, I kind of, I'm overly verbose, let's say, about certain things. I mean, I have peace with myself, So anyway, so this actually came out of Omnibus, interestingly. There was some language in Omnibus that dealt with the issue of agency. This is a legal term. It has to do with, like, kind of who's responsible for, like a breach, for example, a breach. And if a business associate has contract terms in which the way they conduct business is very closely managed and controlled under the terms of contract or other management arrangements by a covered entity, that actually increases the liability of the covered entity, and under the principle of agency, right? It's like, hey, yeah, we had this issue, but we did exactly, we were just doing what our covered entity told us to do. So that would kind of, that reality kind of gravitates against getting too involved in too much, like structure to what you require of your business associates. But the other side of the coin, and can y'all see there's some tension here that's going to build, is that you're not completely allowed to say, I didn't know, hear no evil, see no evil, speak, it's like you're not kind of allowed not that, so to take that approach too. So there's tension between agency and oversight. It's like, so this is what I recommend to my clients. I think having your business associates fill out an annual survey, a pretty basic survey. I have one that I've developed and used a few times. And if you reach out to me, I'll be glad to provide that. So a survey is a great idea. I think it's too bold to ask them to provide a copy per our other discussion. Provide a copy of the risk analysis, but I would like this questionnaire to have them affirm that they've conducted a risk analysis. I would like them to affirm that they've had no incidences, and I'd like them to affirm that they have provided training to their employees. And it's not only 3 questions. I think there are other ones that are good to ask too. But beyond that, I let them manage themselves as independent businesses. That's kind of my take on it. I don't think this is a right-wrong question. This is kind of what I sort of have, as I've evolved. Mike, what do you think? I mean, I know you've done a lot in vendor management, and there are people that would probably not, say, is that enough? And what do you?
I think it's reasonable. Clearly, you can conduct that survey either via phone or actually have them fill it out and sign it. You potentially could even put some language in your business associate agreement that says you're going to ask them to complete that on an annual basis. I would go a little bit deeper on the technical side, but I think we'll save that for next month because
that's
we're
right.
going to do more technical stuff next month.
Yeah, and you can confess that you're technical, Mike. It's like,
that's okay.
It's okay. Mike is my technical guy, So next month we're doing cyber.
I let you typically handle these legalese questions, and I only deal with them to the degree where it actually might be a technical answer. But I do agree with the survey. I do agree. I get asked questions like that on all the time, and it's interesting, and we're not going. I don't want to go too far down this tangent, but it's not that different. We're talking about HIPAA. There's a lot of other compliance initiatives out there and regulatory issues that have very similar requirements that have contract language that you have those types of discussions and have annual surveys filled out. So that happens, and you just mentioned a few: PCI for payment cards, for processing credit cards, GLBA for financial institutions, and so on and so forth.
FINRA,
FINRA, Sarbanes-Oxley. I mean, you can. There's a ton, and they all generally reference the same set of standards, which you and I work around a lot, and that's NIST. So So I tend to fall back, and if I have any questions on that, what does NIST say I should be doing
what would NIST do?
What would NIST do?
What would NIST do? Okay, that's right.
So I fall back on NIST and say, well, NIST says I should be doing this, and I know if this is a government requirement and they're referencing NIST. If I'm doing what NIST says, then I should be good.
And
NIST also influences FISMA, which is the government's own regulatory for information security.
Framework,
Right.
And that's their framework. And in FISMA, it does require contractors to complete an annual survey on their level of compliance with FISMA. Yep.
So I'm gonna ask an IT question. So since we got Mike here today.
Next week you get to be next month you get to be the star because cybersecurity. So anyway. But I'll let you. We're gonna throw you a bone.
Yeah, a bone. And I'm gonna take this because the word systems is in this question. So I think And Steve, by the way, I think George Clooney's kind of verbose too, just saying.
Oh, okay.
Mary Ellen from Danbury, Connecticut wants to know, HIPAA security rule requires regular review of records of systems activity, such as access reports. How many and frequency?
So that's a really big ball of wax.
But you're the man to take the job on there.
Yeah, I will attempt to explain that the best I can. And the way I read it, and any system that contains, transmits, or accesses EPHI needs to generate a log, and that log needs to go somewhere. Typically, it's called log aggregation or a log aggregation point. And then it needs to be stored. Now, there's all kinds of technologies out there that do additional fancy things with those logs, like give you great reports and give you some type of security analysis on the logs. But at the very minimum, you need to be collecting a log from every system that contains, transmits, or stores or accesses EPHI. That's how I read the rule. Those logs can be in the form of system access logs on Windows servers. They can be in the form of what's called syslog. If you have any Unix-based servers or Linux-based servers or any networking gear, routers and firewalls, they will all generate syslog. And you need to be pointing those at like I said, a centralized logging repository. And there's lots of different technologies, and I think I'm going to touch on some of those next month. But at the very minimum, you need to be doing that, recording all of those activities, and also from your EHR, EMR system.
Yeah.
Typically, a lot of those generate their own access logs as well.
Sure.
Yeah, and actually, one thing I'm going to kind of give everybody a quick tip is like probably a fair number of people on here use Active Directory, and one of the things that we end up recommending pretty frequently is enabling what's called a security event logging, which would kind of fall into this general auditing and monitoring category, and then that's kind of in that it's sort of baked in. But I want to sort of say that I have one little bias in this area, and that is I think that the medical records auditing for HIPAA purposes is actually probably the most important element. Like when you're and we'll forgive him because he's an IT guy, but IT guys, like, they really tend to put a lot of focus on network related logs, and that's really important. What Mike said is absolutely true. Anything that touches or stores protect health information, but in a lot of cases the purpose is, one of the things that they want you to be able to do is like, hey, we had Kim Kardashian in our hospital. I want to go look at her medical record, and that's something that is generally going to be done within the EHR. They're going to have these auditing functions, and that you're going to want to be able to perform. So they're kind of related. And you didn't answer it, Mike, so I will. In terms of frequency, the rules again don't say, but you need to do whatever's consistent with your policies, and I think that the frequency scales based on size. What do you think, Mike? Because I think if you're Amazon, you're doing daily audits. If you're a two doc practice, it's probably going to be maybe every 3 months or every 6. Might be different. But
yeah. So once again, if you're not collecting all of that information either directly out of your EMR EHR package or by pointing that to a centralized logging repository, it makes it almost impossible to even do a report, to even get to that point where you say, what is the frequency I should be doing this? Now, assuming you're doing 100% everything right, you're collecting all of your logs, they're going to a centralized location, you're pulling out your logs out of your EMR EHR system, I would then say, what does best practice say? And once again, what would NIST do, right? So
what would NIST do?
Said,
what would NIST do? Yeah.
Yeah, and it's also, what is the purpose? What when you're trying to define a gap, to what gap are you trying to put a control in place to cover, right? So is the purpose to be proactive? And if the purpose is to be proactive, I would say you need to be monitoring those logs 24 hours, 7 days a week to look for someone trying to access something. Now, if you're trying to be reactive, then I would say at minimum I would have some level of log review and reporting done on a monthly basis.
Yeah, and that gets to the issue of monitoring versus like monitoring, alerting versus just retrospective. And again, over a certain size, organizations really should have alerting mechanisms that say, hey, this doesn't look good. We got so
a red flag. Yeah. So,
see, Carol, I told you it was a big ball of wax.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. People ask these little questions, and they expect little answers.
And just one follow-on to that, which so many people miss, especially when they're starting on the path of looking at logs and how they log things, is time. Mm-hmm. If you do not have your log systems, whatever system is generating a log, if they are not all synchronizing to a central clock that you control, then those records are invalid, they're not forensically viable.
Oh.
Yeah. It's what's called NTF or something.
Forensically viable, or like CSI.
You know what?
Forensically viable.
Wow. Hey, Carol, I think, I have a suggestion for next month. We need to come out with a geek sound that we can play every time Mike starts geeking out. I'm going to find that geek sound, but yeah, what's that? What's that? Well, anyway, now I'm geeking out, but yeah, your clocks need to be in sync on your system.
Yeah, your clocks need to be, the system clock on every system in your network should all be synchronizing to a centralized time source.
We can play a snippet from The Big Bang Theory, the theme song.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Just like measure. Yeah.
So Kate from Austin, Texas, my second hometown, Austin, Texas. Shout out.
Yay, love Austin.
Yay.
Austin's fun. Yeah.
I love this question because she asks, what are the 3 reasons practices today follow a HIPAA audit? I'm sure there are like 300 reasons, but she would like to know, the 3 most common reasons, I think, is what she's wanting to know. Practices fail the HIPAA audit.
I'm going to see if I can keep this 3 reasons to under 30 seconds.
Okay.
No policies.
Breach and breach.
Yeah, well, it's like, I mean, that's one thing, but it's like from an audit standpoint, I would say it's no policy, missing policies, no risk analysis. Let's see, let me come up with number 3. Missing policies, no risk analysis, and probably, I mean, those cover so much ground.
And a breach, if you've had a breach.
Yeah. Well, let's say the third, I mean, no documentation. So, maybe, it's like those are the 3 things. It's like you need to have, policies that reflect your risk analysis and that you can document. And so, those are the 3 things you kind of have to do to get your house in order. And I think I'm over 30 seconds. But anyway, we recommend like people put together what I call a book of evidence that kind of allows you to put all that stuff together in one place.
Right.
But to breaches, I mean, to Mike's point, a breach is just because of the breach notification requirement, they're ugly.
Yeah. So I'm going to double back here, or triple back to sort of the SRA question. And this is from, let's see here, it's from Sylvia from Farmington, Michigan. This is a great question too. Can a hospital have a thorough, emphasis on thorough, HIPAA compliance policy in place but still fail an MU audit based on an inferior SRA? And if so, how?
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, because, and again, I cover this, I go into this during my presentation, that I give, that I'm giving next week. And there are 2 webinars, and one goes into the regulation, the other goes in compliance. But the reason is because the risk analysis is the part of the regulations that require organizations to actively identify risks. And so in an example, let's imagine an organization that has a breach. Auditors are now there, and let's say you've got let's say you got beautiful policies, you follow them, and you have all this supporting documentation. Does that mean you're going to do okay on your audit? And the answer is no, not if your risk analysis is not in order and the auditor deems that it's a risk that you should have known. So, like, for example, if somebody fails tomorrow, or has a breach tomorrow, either scenario, a breach that leads to an audit, and it's related to the use of Windows XP, they may have everything else in order, but they're going to fail their audit if the use of Windows XP was not noted in their risk analysis. So the risk analysis is the thing that kind of covers it's the thing that requires you to actively discover and understand your risks. So and ultimately my answer to the question is that to have one without the other is to not have the one. In other words, you don't really have your policy/documentation in order unless you've got a good quality risk analysis. So now, it is not clear how strict, what, absent a breach gives them a very clear goal. Like, in fact, when you have a breach, you have to do a risk analysis, and it's a part of the process. It's what a risk analysis for purposes of determining the breach and whether it was a breach. But absent that kind of clear goal of like, hey, you had this XP and we need to know whether you should have known about the risk that led to it. But absent that, it's actually not clear how strict auditors are going to be related to whether they will deem a risk analysis acceptable. I mean, we just don't know. So I think Mike would agree. Do a good one. Really know what your risks are, and that means following, proper, NIST guidelines. Again, back to what would NIST do? Guidelines related to conducting the risk analysis. So.
It's funny. It sort of leads into my next question. Denise from St. Louis, Missouri wanted to know, are there any current audit tools / checklists available to perform a pre-audit risk assessment or develop a readiness program? And you've talked about that several times on HIPAA Chat. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's like, well, first of all, don't make the mistake of thinking that a checklist is a risk analysis. So it is not. There's abundant evidence of that. So doing a risk analysis, requires, a complete inventory of IT assets, and then analyzing the risk by class and yada, yada, yada. But having said that, there are tools available. So, and Carol's actually heard me present. There are tools, risk analysis tools that are available. And my position on them is that I'm not really a big fan of any of them, but if you, and I've got to say, especially the Department of Health and Human Services risk analysis tool that they released last year, my biases are showing y'all, but I cannot tell you how much I dislike that tool. It's just, it's not good.
Funny you mentioned that, Steve. I actually had to go rescue a customer yesterday who was using that tool, trying to get in under the attestation window. Realized she hadn't completed a risk assessment. Started asking a lot of questions around it. Saved her work halfway through, but then the tool totally froze up on her and she couldn't get back to it.
Oh dear.
So.
Yeah. And the thing is too, what's interesting, the output of the report, if you look at how it'll give you like checks like what your response is, but it doesn't actually have the question in the output. You see an answer to something that was asked mysteriously in the software, but you don't know because the output doesn't tell you. And more importantly, in so many ways these tools have the flavor of a checklist. They sure do seem like a checklist to me, and so I will say that if a person that's insistent on doing it, the HIMSS has a tool. The Health Information Management Systems Society has a tool that's decent. It's not great. I'm not a big fan of any of these tools because I think risk analysis, is best. It's good. I know this is self-serving, but y'all have heard me say it before. Is best done by an expert. But if you had to go and find something, the HIMSS tool. Which you could literally do HIMSS security risk analysis.
If you Google it, it'll pop up.
Yeah, Google it. You should be able to find it, and it's an Excel spreadsheet, and it's pretty good. All these tools have holes that I wish somebody would learn to fill, but it's pretty good. Yeah.
Guys, I'm gonna unmute Kevin, and Kevin has a question regarding training. So hold on. Kevin, are you with us?
I am.
Hi, Kevin. Welcome to HIPAA Chat. Yes, you've got Steve
Thank you.
You've got Steve and Mike's and my attention.
Wait, Kevin, you got to tell us what your Hollywood avatar is.
Oh, yeah. Kevin, I forgot to tell you that when I was chatting you.
Yeah, that's right. Hollywood avatar. You can totally make something up since we have no idea what you look like. Even though I actually do look like George Clooney, right? Right, Mike?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so. Okay,
yeah,
Kevin,
I'm more of the Tom Cruise look-alike type.
Okay, we'll go for that.
A question for you guys. I've always been under the assumption that annual HIPAA training is required, and I've had somebody challenge me to prove where HIPAA says that, and I'll be damned if I can find it.
It doesn't say that, and so your person is right. The person that's challenging you is right, but let me kind of circle around and give you, if somebody were challenging me on that, this is what I would say. First of all, the rules require you to do training, so there's a standard called Security Training Awareness. All the standards are required, so you must do training, but the key thing is that training must be consistent with your policies and procedures. And so if I so from a regulatory standpoint, the person's right, but if you go and look at best practice, you want to always do, and in fact, it does vary by state. So, for example, Texas law, it's like HB 300 or something. It's, you have to have, security privacy training within, 30 days of employment, things like that. So, but Kevin, do you happen to be in Texas? I can't remember where she said you were from.
No, I'm in balmy South Dakota.
Okay, so if you want to, Kevin, if it's really important that you win the argument, you might want to try to see if South Dakota law addresses it. But where you really win it is on best practice. I mean, NIST and many, many other organizations say that annual refresher training is what you need to do. But in a strictly technical standpoint, the rules don't say how often you have to do it.
Yeah,
so.
And Steve, if I could just chime in real quick on that. Also under the security awareness and training standard, it specifically talks about security reminders as well. Mm-hmm. So even though it doesn't say the security reminders have to be on an annual or monthly or however basis, you kind of read between the lines there.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Something's got to be, it's not like you just couldn't do it once and then 5 years later, that's a reminder.
The thing is though about that, Mike, is that all of the specific, what are called implementation specifications under that standard are addressable, which means that the reasonable and appropriate standard, applies. So somebody could argue, I wouldn't want to be the person doing it to an auditor saying, oh yeah, reminders weren't reasonable and appropriate for us. I mean,
well, do you have your geek bell ready?
No, we're going to get that for
we're going to get that for sure.
So
yeah.
just a little fun fact: there are over 51,000 new virus variants coming out every week.
51,000.
51,000. That's today. That number keeps going up. I won't get into the reason why that is, but we'll say that for another time, but that is a fact. There are over 51,000 new variants of just viruses coming out every week. I find it highly reasonable and appropriate to do weekly reminders because of that.
Yeah,
wow.
Yeah. I think that in the way when I'm talking like next week, if you come in, join us next week, it's like what I say is there are two reasons to do training. One is for the reason Mike just said, is to prevent a disaster. I mean, Mike, do you know off the top of your head what percentages of breaches are related to some way or another to user error, whether it be physical security or clicking on a bad link? I mean, it's high. It's really high.
Yeah, it's really high. It's really high. I would say it's probably up in the 80% range. Are directly related to bad user behavior.
Yeah, and so in some ways, training may be the only thing between you and a breach, and it's just so your employees need to know that. Yeah, even though that guy, Kevin, I'm gonna vilify you here. Kevin, was so nice on the phone, and he knew my Aunt Mabel in high school, and kind of knew some details about me, and he said he was IT support. That does not mean you need to give him your password. I mean, that's and that's by the way, I just described a classic social engineering scheme but the other reason, though, is honestly what I call CYA, and that is you may need to terminate somebody for cause related to a HIPAA breach, and you do not want them to be able to make a credible claim in court that you did not know. So in a lot of ways, training like this gets to a basic management function of being able to to document, in an HR file and otherwise kind of, but they took the training and they had a little quiz and they passed that and they acknowledged that they'd taken it, and, that documentation and that training log is going to be important.
Right.
So,
Kevin, thank you so much for your question. Stay warm up there.
All right, thank you.
It's a bit chilly. So I think we've got time for one more question. Must all offenses, even one like a misdirected fax, paperwork given to the wrong patient, etc., be reported to a state or government office?
So the answer is yes. So I like these yes/no questions, but no one's ever perfectly satisfied with that. So, so the answer is that organizations need to keep a log of any breach of privacy. So that would mean, under what is a breach actually changed under Omnibus. And under Omnibus, it's basically points to the privacy rules and change the definition to an unauthorized disclosure of protected health information. So misdirected faxes and misdirected mail would fall under, would under that definition would be considered a breach. So if it's less than 500 breaches, just keep a log. And by the way, a breach. The way the cases are adjudicated is if you have a laptop with 600 records, that's 600 breaches.
Right.
So if you and by the way, misdirected mail is an extremely common occurrence. And you need to take steps per your policies, to address that. But you would put that into a log, and then you would report it annually. But if it's greater than 500 records, you have to report it within 60 days to the Office of Civil Rights of the Department of Health and Human Services, and there's a whole process to do that. And so annual reporting for less than 500 records and over 500 records, it has to be reported within 60 days, and you have to notify the local media, and you have to provide immediate mitigation services to the victims of the breach. We don't want to get to 500. We really don't.
Yeah.
So,
and all of that is actually documented on the OCR, Office of Civil Rights, has
website.
It's HSS. If you Google HHS, which is Health and Human Services, OCR, you'll get to the right page. I just want to remind everybody that, as Steve mentioned, next week, this is his webinar. We're not involved in that, but you can...
but we love you. We love you anyway.
I know, we love you anyway. Talking about HIPAA 101 and Compliance Essentials. So you can visit that URL, and when you get a copy of the PowerPoint, that'll be clickable, so you can go ahead and register. And we want to...
Let me actually say one other thing about that real quick. There's two 1-hour webinars that are back-to-back, and you have to register for both. However, it ends up that, like in many cases, we have everybody signs up for both, in which case we can get kind of through all that material in a little bit less than 2 hours, like an hour and a half maybe, if we can cover them that way. But if we have somebody that joins us for the second one, and we have to sort of start over and cover some of the same material, then it ends up being about 2 hours. So
sign up for both.
If you've not, it's a good idea to do both. And honestly, if you have not ever done one of my webinars, I would recommend you start with HIPAA 101 because it really goes through the regulations, and we get to a lot of very practical, practical application of the rules.
They're terrific. And also, we had a lot of people ask questions today during our session. I will get those questions to Steve and Mike and have them email you if they can. If you don't hear from them, though, please stalk them. Do the Hollywood thing and stalk them.
Yeah, absolutely.
And email Steve at the email above, obviously, spearman@healthsecuritysolutions.com. And Mike, if it's an IT technical Big Bang Theory question, channel your best Sheldon and email Mike at healthsecuritysolutions.com. We will, of course, want to thank eFax, our sponsor. You guys are terrific, and we appreciate the support. We will see you you guys next month for our next HIPAA chat, and we'll of course let everybody know
Yeah.
when that date is. I think we're thinking 4 weeks from now, and I think we're thinking about talking about cybersecurity. Ooh.
Yeah, put your geek on, right?
Put your
Put your geek on.
Put your geek on. Everybody.
Put your geek on.
It's going to be very geeky, but we'll keep it at a high level.
Yeah, Mike is actually surprisingly good at really explaining stuff in pretty simple terms. So we will not make it too technical at all. So.
Exactly. Everybody have a great weekend, and we'll see you on the next HIPAA chat.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.